situations. I remember, and I keep going back to traffic tickets. I remember I was coming home from work one day, and I was coming up through Pasadena, and I'm trucking down this thing, and I'm doing 50 miles an hour, right? And all of a sudden, there was a little park entrance, and all of a sudden, the Pasadena police officer leaps, mind you, from behind the little decorative wall they had that said Pasadena Park. He leaps from behind the wall, runs out into the street in front of me, right in front of me. I'm doing 50 miles an hour. I'm now in emergency shutdown mode. The truck is shaking like this, and he's going like this. I'm like, dude, that's going to be good luck if I don't run over you, let alone turn the corner. Get turned, and I get in there, and he comes up, introduces himself. He got the whole spiel going, and he goes, I pulled you over today because you're doing 50 in a 45 right past this park entrance. And I said, no, it's a 50-mile-an-hour zone. He goes, no, it doesn't turn to 50-mile-an-hour zone until the second park entrance. So I was a little early. And I said, no, are you sure? He goes, yeah, I'm pretty sure. I went, well, I said, if that's right, then you got me. I was doing 50 miles an hour. I thought I was in the 50-mile-an-hour zone. And he looks, and I had a radar detector on my windshield. He said, I hit you with the radar. He said, I know you saw me. I said, oh, I saw you. I saw the radar go off. I thought I was in a 50-mile-an-hour zone. And he kind of laughed. He put his head down. He goes, I hate to do this. He said, but we're called out here special because people were complaining about it. And I said, hey, you don't have to apologize. Do your job. I was wrong, right? It didn't bother me any to sign that ticket, to accept that ticket, because I felt like the officer was being fair. I was in the wrong, right? Most of the time, what can we not do? Admit or accept that we are wrong, right? It's difficult to do. You can ask my wife, who's the world's worst? I always got a reason for why I'm being right. Always got a reason, right? Sometimes that reason is, no, you're wrong. But we don't like to admit we're wrong. But if we trust that those who are in authority, whether it's a judge, a police officer, a parent, a boss, a husband, a wife, because some of that's the way the authority runs in some families, right? It's a husband one day and a wife the next. But if we trust that they are honestly and fairly dispensing justice, it's a little easier to accept when we're wrong. It's when we don't trust that, right? So when you're in that position, you got to set aside your prejudices. You got to do things honestly. I used to go and ask my boss all the time. I had a guy, I would inspect his work. And he did things very differently than I would do them. And I had to learn to ask myself, is it wrong or just different? Right? Because a lot of times, what do we feel like? My way is the right way. It's the only way. That's right. There's some like that. Huh? Yeah, the right way, the wrong way, and the army way. Right? And I had to go on several occasions. I would go and ask my boss. I said, look, I'm having a real struggle here. I said, I would describe, I said, this is what I saw. I said, I think this is wrong. I said, but this guy, he pushes my buttons, right? And so I don't want to be unfair. He would go and look at it. He came back one day, he goes, oh, no, we can't let that fly. He said, and I said, okay, I can handle it from here. But I just wanted to make sure, that I was not being unfair, that I was not
judging him wrong,
judging the wicked to be innocent and the innocent to be guilty. Right? I do that enough without knowing it, let alone. So I'm a little sensitive to that. Okay. All right. So let's go to our next verse. Do your planning, prepare your fields before building your house. So it's a single verse. And just to foster some class participation here tonight. I'm going to call on someone to answer immediately. Everybody's going, oh my God. Now, what do you think it means? Give me some ideas. You read this verse, what are you thinking that this means? Nobody's thinking?
Well, to me, I was thinking about this while you were saying it. It's building a house will probably take so much time that you're going to lose out on sowing and reaping the fields. And so your food and everything like that, you're just really hurting your family in the long run doing it that way. And also you should plan on how to build your house so it's done correctly and it's in an efficient way.
Okay. You're dancing with it. This is really good. You know, you're there. I mean, you're on the dance floor. Woohoo! So, anybody else want to offer?
You have a thought like it brings it to like having a safety net, like a savings account, like you're you get a new house.
Right.
Before you get the new house, you have your savings account. You have everything ready for those payments. Like you have 6 months.
Right. So you plan and you're on the dance floor too. You should be able to produce before you're able to consume. Before you start consuming. Okay. You need to be able to produce, or in other words, you should be able to support a family before you begin to build one. Okay? And yes, there's a word or two missing, and I did this. I'm back at work 9 hours a day, and so when I come home in the evenings, I'm not thinking straight. But, you know, if only we could get this idea across, especially to those who are young. You should be able to support a family before you begin to build one. Right? You ought to be producing before you're consuming. Or in other words, you ought to be able to supply the necessities, or you should supply the necessities first and the luxuries after. Okay? And, you know, we've got these youngsters, they get married, no job or no skill set, right? They're both working at Whataburger, and we're going to get married and life is going to be grand. And like, what are you going to do? I mean, I get it. We're so in love, right? But there's no thought there. How will we support ourselves? And no, mom and dad are not the answer, right? Yes, they are. And so let me just back up. So, you know, my dad was born in 1924, my mom in 1927. Both of my grandparents were born before the turn of the last century. They were born in the 1880s. And my mom and dad got married during World War II, and my grandmother and grandfather by that time had a house. It had a basement, and they had outfitted the basement as living quarters. And it seemed like every one of their kids spent a couple of years after they got married in the basement. In fact, a couple of their grandkids spent a couple of years in the basement. Now, I never did, but only because I didn't live in Illinois. I lived down here. It was too far to commute, right?
When the basements down here are usually pools.
And yeah, the basement down here is usually pools. They're saunas. So, but my point being, in the old days, right, it wasn't unusual for parents to provide tacit support, right? I mean, I'm not going to support you. I'm not buying you groceries. I'm not giving you money. But here's a place to stay. You don't have to pay me rent, right? That kind of support. Help get the kids launched, right? Because in the early days of any life, right, you don't know anything. Your earning power is not there. And this scripture kind of speaks to that, right? Start to bring in, so you'd be able to produce. You know, prepare your fields. You need to have support, something coming in. We don't farm anymore, right? We wouldn't know a plow from a harrow. but not a harem, a harrow, which is anyway, never mind. So, you know what it is.
Harrow.
Harrow. But I was okay, so I was having another thought when I was getting ready for this. I was going to ask the question. If society completely collapsed, who do you think could survive? There's no groceries. Of course, you've got guns and ammo. Is that what you're thinking? No groceries. You don't go to the grocery store anymore. So where do you think we would be in trouble? I like to think, especially me, I like to think of myself as very self-reliant, right? I can do a lot of stuff. But if I had to grow a potato, right?
Don would starve to death.
Don would starve to death. Now, Don could grow a potato.
I say I wouldn't starve.
Yeah, she would starve.
Way to go, John.
But if I had to grow a potato, right, especially in this climate, right, with this ground, you put a potato in the ground here, and you know what? It comes out looking like a marble because the ground is so hard, right? You really got to prepare the ground. I remember when I was a kid, my dad planted a little garden. When I say little, it was 6 by 8, okay? And he loved fresh tomatoes, and he planted tomatoes, and we learned real quick what a hornworm was.
Oh, they're so annoying.
Yeah. So we aren't as self-reliant as we think we are sometimes, right? And so we don't think in terms of agriculture, which is what a lot of this is written, and that's what it's talking about here. But being able, having your fields ready, being able to plant and reap means you're able to sustain yourself. And once you're able to sustain yourself, then you can start thinking about the luxuries, the finer things in life. And this goes for, young men, right? To get just a little old-fashioned. This goes for young men. You should learn how to sustain a family before you actually go and marry one. Marry a wife and then build a family. Right? So that's why I say, how many people do you think could benefit from? But we don't like to wait. No, can't wait. Sorry, gotta go now.
Another thing that we tend to do when we're young is we look at our mother and father and we say, oh, "Man, I want what you and Daddy have."
Exactly. Now, what y'all have now.
You don't understand that it took me and your mama 33 years to get what we've got.
I've had that talk with both of my son-in-laws, because they come on and they go, and I said, you can't compare yourself at 28, 29, 30.
To me at 56.
To me
or you at 62.
Thank you very much for letting the entire world know.
48, 58.
Yeah. You can't compare yourself at 28 or 29 to myself at 36.
Yeah.
Right? Because I am benefiting now from many years of stupidity. Right? And I've learned a thing or two, maybe not as much as I should have. What I haven't learned, I carry in knots on my head from beating my head on the wall. But you can't do that. You cannot compare that way. You would have to look at where I was when I was your age, right?
Yeah.
I was asked one time, at the risk of him seeing this and blowing his head up, I was asked one time about my son. What did I think he was worth hiring? And I said, well, I will tell you this: if you like me, you'll like him. Because I said, at this point in his life, he's half the man I am, but he's twice the man I was. Right? Because he benefits, hopefully, benefit not only my wisdom, but from God's wisdom, right? And so that's what we're looking to do here, is we're looking to be able to pass on wisdom. All right, moving on. This is so neat. I just push a button and it just goes like crazy. All right, don't testify against your neighbors without cause. Don't lie about them, and don't say, now I can get paid. Now I can pay them back for what they've done to me. I'll get even with them. Once again, Why are you shaking your head like that? I'm getting even. Once again, we are visiting the themes of justice, the theme of honor, of fairness, and impartiality. Okay? And that's what this is talking about here. Only this time, we're not in the role of judge, right? Before, it was speaking from the perspective of someone who is making the judgment. Now, it's speaking from the perspective of someone who is making the accusation or playing the part of witness, right? And it talks about don't testify your neighbors without a cause. Now, I know some of y'all are going to go, well, who is my neighbor? Well, they asked Jesus that question, and they really weren't prepared for the answer. Because he talked about not only some stranger, somebody they didn't know, but somebody that culturally they didn't like, a Samaritan, right? Samaritan was along the road, got robbed. Y'all know the story, laying in the ditch. Who was the man's neighbor? Right? The man who took care of him, the man who took responsibility. Here, he's talking about don't testify against your neighbors without a cause. Now, if there's a reason, if there's a just cause, you're not to allow yourself to be taken advantage of. But once again, we have to be fair. We have to be honest. We have to divorce our emotions from the situation and say, is my definition of fair in this moment, in this case, what's best for me? Right? It's not, we have to be careful. As God's people, bless you. Make sure your eyes get back in. Your eyes bugged out.
Yeah, I know.
So as God's people, we need to make sure that we are being honest in our assessments. Right? We can't take advantage, right? And we saw this in a couple of chapters ago, particularly with the disadvantaged folks. Don't dare take advantage of it. And so once again, right, we're being admonished to be fair, not to let our personal prejudices getting in the way, even against those who have wronged us, right? Someone may have wronged you, but that doesn't give you the right. It gives you the right to seek vengeance, it gives you the right to seek justice, but not vengeance.
Vengeance is God.
Vengeance is God's domain.
Yeah.
And Jesus, right, Jesus said it best. He said, you are willing to listen. I say, love your enemies. Well, I still may have a just cause against my enemy in court, right? That I need to have adjudicated, that I need to have decided, but that doesn't mean I'm moving in hatred or in malice. I'm seeking justice, right? And there's a difference, right, between vengeance and justice. Justice is what is fair, what is right, according to established laws and guidelines. And vengeance is the satisfaction of hurt. I've been wronged, I've been hurt, and I want to make you feel what I felt. That's vengeance.
Well, but and see where the problem lies is what you said is true, that the definition of justice is what is fair according to legal norms, customs, and law, right?
Right.
The problem is we all go into the litigation, whether it's in a court of law, before the king, before the pastor, or whoever it is, children before their mother and father. We go before that judge because mom and dad play the part of judge in arguments between children and on down the line. We go into these litigations thinking we are right.
Right.
Thinking we know the proper interpretation of what is fair.
Mm-hmm.
But we have to surrender our authority to proper authority, and whatever they deem as fair,
Right.
we need to, as Christians especially, say, if that's what you say is fair, then I will accept
that. That goes back to what we were saying just a few minutes ago, right? Trusting in those who have that authority, have that responsibility, right? We tend, and if we could pull back and look at ourselves, right, from the outside, we might go, let me ask you this. How many of y'all have ever been involved in some situation, some circumstance, where 6 months, a year, 2 years, whatever, sometime later, you look back and go, I was completely wrong. I was completely wrong. I couldn't see it at the time, and I argued for my position that I was right, but I look at it now and I think I'm embarrassed. I was so wrong.
Well, you can never see it when you're in it. You
No.
can't see it when you're in it.
And that's
why you need that outside
That's
influence
right.
and
That's
judge
right. But
to
as
say,
Christians, we are urged, we are encouraged to learn how to do that very thing. When we are in it, to look at it from God's perspective. You remember what Proverbs was trying to teach us, right? It's trying to give us insight into the way God thinks. Right?
Mhm.
Insight into the way God thinks, so that we can begin to apply God's logic to not only our lives, but everything that we see around us, right? And so, why do we love our enemies? When I was preparing this, I went through this whole thought process. Why do we love our enemies?
First and foremost, it's a command.
It's a commandment. But why would God tell us that?
Because He loved us while we were still His enemies.
Mhm.
That's true.
And that's still
Well-
his child.
What?
That's his child.
There you go. So think about this. Put yourself in Adam or Eve's position. Cain kills Abel. So Abel is gone. Abel is now separated from you. But Cain is also your beloved child. Does killing him bring Abel back?
Nope.
No. Right? I mean, you're heartbroken, right? But this is also your child. Now, we look at how God thinks, right? So from God's perspective, Abel is separated from him by death. Cain is separated from him by additional sin, right? What does God do? Does God kill Abel? Does he say, oh, that's it, you're going to go through life living with no limbs and you're going to rub around on your belly and just depend on, whatever grub happens to crawl by to eat? No. He protects him from people who would kill him. But what does he do? God sets in motion, right? Because this is what happened when Adam and Eve fell. God has set in motion a plan to rescue both of them. Right? Abel from death, Cain from sin. Now, he started this plan in motion when Adam and Eve died. When Adam and Eve sinned, which is Adam and Eve died, right? Why? Because in God's world, death is sin. Sin is death, right? It's the same thing. And so God didn't say, I'm going to rescue half of my children. He's going to rescue all of his children. And to that end, then, he says, now that you're a parent, when we were children, right, there was that one brother, that one sister that just drove us nuts. But now that you're a parent, what happens when you see your children fighting? I mean, really fighting.
It makes me mad.
It makes me mad. It breaks my heart. Right? Right. You want to step in, you go to your corner, and you go to your corner, right? And you establish peace. You don't want them fighting. You don't want them at each other's throats. Love your enemies. Why? Because your enemy, he don't know this, but that doesn't exempt you because you do know it. You are brothers. You are sisters. And that is a hard but mind-blowing concept if we ever get it down. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who hurt you. Right? I'm going to pray for you, all right. Pray for those who hurt you. Not physically. We all hear the stories about the physical hurt being forgiven. How about the emotional? Right? That is, we have to learn to forgive the emotional hurt. Because, more times likely than not, that's what we're going to carry around with us for years and years and years.
I wonder how many Christians, not people, Christians, those who are called by the name of Jesus, pray that God give them the gift of mercy. Because without mercy being part of your own character, you will not receive mercy.
Right.
According to the Sermon on the Mount.
So
Jesus said, "Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy."
Right.
So if Jesus is saying, if I'm merciful, I'll obtain it, then the opposite must also be true, that if I am not merciful, I will not receive mercy.
I am in danger.
Because it couples together with the same passage of Scripture later on in the Gospel where Jesus said, if you do not forgive men their sins against you, your heavenly Father will not forgive you of your sins.
And you know who else had a problem with that? Peter.
Peter had a problem with that.
Peter. What if my brother turns and offends me, right?
Forgive him.
He said, if he asks, you forgive him.
Uh-huh.
He said, wait, that's not good. What if he does it again? Right? Because what do we say? Oh, okay, I'll forgive you this time. But if you do it again, you did it with malice aforethought.
And here is another follow-up conversation that people automatically bring when that subject comes up. Well, but does that mean I have to be in relationship with them? Well, Jesus forgives you 70 times every day, if not more than that, and he's still in a relationship with you. So, you've just answered your own question.
Right.
By examining that. So, but here's where people, I think, this is where Christian maturity, spiritual maturity, should kick in, if it hasn't already kicked in the life of the believer. The reason that we find it difficult to extend mercy is because we find it difficult to actually go in love to the person who offended us and say, we need to talk about this. Instead, we will go to someone else and say, you will never, do you know what someone did? They don't need to know that. They need to know that. Even if you think they should know it, they may not know it, and you need to go to them and say, I need to talk to you in love as your brother or sister in Christ. The other day when A, B, C, and D happened, I want you to know that don't say that offended me. Say it hurt me that someone I love dearly would make me feel that way. So you're not putting them on the defense. You're giving them an out to reach back out to you in love and say, I never would have done that had I known it would have hurt you.
One of the things I was told...
But we're not mature enough to do that.
Yeah. One of the things I was told one time is if you're having a problem loving somebody, don't go to them and say, I'm having a problem loving you. Robin, I'm having a problem loving you, right? Instead, start praying for them.
Yeah.
Not the generic, oh God, please bless Robin. Hang around and find out what's bothering that person. And then go to God and pray specifically for that to be resolved. If you observe that they come to church in a busted up car, right? Begin to pray for them to be blessed with a new car. If you see that their shoes are worn, I'm not saying Robin's shoes are worn out or her car's busted up, but I'm saying, but find out what is it they're talking about that's bugging them, and then I raise my hand first. Okay, world's worst for quick, high level, 500,000 foot prayers. Yeah, God, please be with Shannon today. Okay, that's it. I've got him covered now. Let's move on to the next one because I got so many people to pray for. Ha! Right? No. Dig down in the weeds and go to war. I am not, and I will fully admit this, I am not a intercessory prayer warrior. It's difficult for me to get and pray, go to war in prayer, right? That's a gift. And you either have to have been given it or you have to fight to develop it, right? I'm still fighting because it wasn't given to me, but I'm fighting. But pray. When you do that, when you're praying that that person be lifted up, when you're praying that that person be taken care of, when you're praying that that person be blessed, right? It begins to change you, not that person. Now, God's going to honor those prayers, and that person's going to be blessed. I'm not saying that, but it begins to affect you, right? It's like the old saying, when you give respect to somebody, regardless of whether they've earned it or not, it doesn't speak about them. It speaks about you. It doesn't speak to their character. It speaks to your character, right? So, okay, we'll move on now. Everybody's going. All right. Chapter 24:30. I walked by the field of a lazy person. It's probably my front yard. I walked by the field of a lazy person. Is it yours? The vineyard of one with no common sense. Lazy and stupid. I saw that it was overgrown with nettles. It was covered with weeds. Its walls were broken down. And as I looked and thought about it, I learned this lesson. A little extra sleep, a little more slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest. Then poverty will pounce on you like a bandit. Scarcity will attack you like an armed robber. Okay? So what is he saying? Right? He says, I learned a lesson by observing. Now, this is not something you'll hear normally, right? I learned a lesson by observing. Oh, that we all could learn lessons by observing. Sometimes we do, right? Sometimes we do. Like when Big Brother got caught stealing something and Mama whipped him so hard that he couldn't sit down for 6 weeks. We were like, what were we like? Wait, I ain't never doing that. Learned a lesson by observing, right? But see, this didn't involve punishment. He said, I walked by and I looked and I said, And he learned a lesson, right? And this is the one with no common sense. That's not stupidity in as much as they can't see the value of work, okay? And so we see this theme of laziness and sloth. And if we think back and we reference that first verse, right? About the producing part of life, right? So we're not agricultural. So what is the producing? What are our fields? What is the producing part of our life?
Job.
Thank you. Our job, our career, right? And so when we begin to read this, the overgrown, the covered with weeds, the walls were broken down. If we say, okay, so that's an agricultural example. And if I modernize that just a little bit, I don't pay attention to the thing that I do that supports my family, my job. Now, yeah, I know if anybody's paying attention, right, they're really big right now on this work-life balance, right? And that's true. You got to keep things in balance. And who is our set of scales by which we judge our balance? God. Jesus, in Matthew, he said, take my what? Yoke. So have you ever seen a set of scales? Right, that you put a little something over here and you put a little something over here and you see one's heavier than the other. It's doing like this, right? The thing that goes over the post that the two little trays hang from,
Yoke.
that's called a yoke. That's no yoke.
They use them on
That's a yoke, right? And Jesus said, if I'm what's supplying your balance, right? That's what he's saying. Use me. Use me to achieve balance, right? But here, Solomon's talking about, okay, so all things being equal, balance being achieved, there are folks who will not pay attention to their fields, the thing which supports them, right? So we have to, when we're looking to achieve balance, right, we have to take care of those things that God has given us to support ourselves with it. A career, a skill set, right? Whatever it is you do to earn a living, to make a living, you need to pay attention to it. Don't be that guy. We've all got that guy at work, right? Who's always hiding, can't ever be found, can't ever be trusted. What, it's you?
They always told me a good person's hard to find.
A good person's hard to find. Oh, okay. All right. Yeah, good man's hard to find. Well, that's me. You can't find me. Yeah, figures. Okay, you're the guy. So we got one of those. No, I'm teasing. So that's what he's talking about here. If we don't pay attention to the things that support us, how many? Let me pose this question to you. How many of y'all know who Jimmy Cagney was? Don't be afraid. Raise your hand. Don't be afraid. Jimmy Cagney. Okay. He was the one. Have you ever heard somebody go, "You dirty rat"?
Yes.
Okay, that was Jimmy Cagney. He never actually said that, but he was a huge movie star. Okay, Hollywood back in the 20s, 30s, 40s. Huge. And he's quite a good dancer, in fact, which was surprising for a guy who played gangsters all the time. He was also about that tall. He wasn't very big. He owned a farm in, I want to say Connecticut, maybe Massachusetts. He owned a farm. And later in life, he moved there. He would come back to Hollywood. He would make a movie. He would go back to the farm. And somebody asked him, they said, "Why don't you stay in Hollywood?" He said, "I'm only here for the work." He said, "The work pays for what I really love to do." Right? So he understood this deal. He came in to do the work. He paid attention and did the work because he understood it supported his other life. You want to talk about work-life balance, right? You know, don't blame work-life balance because you're not showing up at work and so you get laid off because I'm not showing up at work so I can spend more time with my family. Well, okay, now you get to spend all the time with your family and you better know how to plant a potato. Okay? So to be effective or to be productive, we must work consistently, diligently, and enduringly. And that enduringly part, well, the consistently part, the diligently part. A lot of kids today. Do you know why kids right out of high school or in high school make minimum wage? Think about it. Because they don't know how to work.
Yep.
They don't know how to work, right? Everything is a big inconvenience to them. Right? Now there are exceptions. There are some who, Daddy told them, "You want a car? Okay. Go figure it out for yourself." And they worked hard and they got a car and they realized early, right? Oh, look, work pays for, okay, got it, I'm there, right? And so those become, A performers, A-list performers. You know who they lay off on a job first? They lay off the guy with the folding of the hand, the guy who's let the walls get broken down. So here Solomon is basically saying, you got to work. You remember what God told Adam in the Garden of Eden after they eat the apple, and He told Eve she was going to have pain in childbearing. So you ladies can thank her for that. He told Adam, He said, "You will work by the sweat of your brow, and the earth will fight you every step of the way." All right. So now we're stepping into chapter 25. And the very first verse, chapter 25, these are more Proverbs of Solomon collected by the advisors of King Hezekiah of Judah. Now, Hezekiah was what was known as a scholarly king. He spent a lot of time studying and reading, and most present-day scholars believe that what he had done, now Hezekiah was 4, 5, 6, he was several kings after Solomon, okay? His father and his son were real heathens. Okay, I mean, how in the world Hezekiah popped up in the middle of them as righteous as he was? But he spent a lot of his time studying and reading, and so they feel like that he discovered some more writing of Solomon and had added this to the book of Proverbs, okay? So these additional collections. So in verse 2, he says, chapter 25, verse 2, he says, "It is God's privilege to conceal things and the king's privilege to discover them. No one can comprehend the height of heaven or the depth of the earth or all that goes on in the king's mind." So these two verses teach us that there are things about God, about creation, that God has hidden, and we will never understand those mysteries. Okay? It is a knowable pursuit, it is an honorable pursuit to try to understand them. But God is so much more. Right? There are things we just, even if we knew them, we wouldn't understand them. Right? Most of the time, when a parent dealing with a child resorts to that final phrase, "because I said so," it's because the incessant whining, right? Why? And you've explained it, and they just don't get it. So you say, "Okay, I will give you a reason that you can understand. Because I said so." Right? And then the child's like, "Oh, I didn't have to be like that." You know, they go away all whiny and everything.
I say that ain't no reason.
No reason. But there are some things that when our children respond, they just can't understand. My kids, when we were growing up, right, if I had a check and a checkbook, I could buy them something. No, it doesn't work that way. You got to have money in the bank, and you get this blank look, right? And then they reset. Boop, boop. And they go, "Yeah, but you got checks in the checkbook." But no, you can't have it. "But why?" "Because I said so." Right? They don't get it. Oh, they get it now.
Now they want the card.
Yeah. Yeah, you got a card in your pocket. Right? But see, same way with God. Right? There are things God said, if I tried to explain it to you, you wouldn't understand it. You can't. Now, one day, I'll explain. One day, I won't have to explain it. You'll just get it. But that day ain't today. So for today, it's because he said so. Right? There are things that are just unknowable about God. Now, those who try to understand and explain these things, the scholar kings should get honor for doing that. I mean, they're trying to understand that, but not all things can be known. I am completely and totally convinced that when we get to heaven, we're going to be looking around going, "I can't believe I was that wrong about that much." Because how many of us think we got it? We understand God. We pretty much got it all, at least all the important stuff. We're really in there, right? And we're going to get there, and God's going to go, "Well, yeah, you had about that much. And the rest, I'm just going to cover you with grace because you were cute while you were wrong." But I got my little grandson, right? And it's very difficult. You'll ask him to do something, he'll just look at you and go, "Nope." And he's so adorable, right? "Nope." Or "Yep." You know, and God's looking at us as, "Y'all are adorable. You're wrong, but you're adorable." And we're going to get to heaven, and we're going to go, "Oh boy, was I wrong." Right? And I'm going to be over here trying to apologize to Alton. "I was so wrong, brother." And you know what he's going to be doing? He's going to be looking at me going, "And I was so wrong too." There are things that we just don't understand. Not that we shouldn't try, not that we shouldn't spend our lives studying to understand, but we need to realize that there's just some things that we're going to struggle with, right? It's hard to know why those in charge do things. He's talking about the king, right? It's hard to know what goes on in a king's mind. How many of y'all have ever wondered what that person was thinking, only to get that job and realize what they was thinking? Right? A lot of times, I had this conversation with my boss today, actually. We were talking about something, and he said, well, let me tell you why they're doing this, right? We were having this conversation. I said, I'm not paid to look at what they're looking at. I'm paid to look at the technical part. And so I make my recommendations based on my limited view of the world. They have a wider view of the world. Like, we're running out of money. Okay? And we can't afford to do that this year. And I'm like, but if you don't do it this year, we're going to be at risk. I understand that. We can't, right? Because they're paid to look at a different part. And so from my perspective, looking at the technical part, I'm looking at the bean counters going, what are y'all thinking? And they're like, we're looking at the money. That's what we're thinking. So just because someone is higher up or in charge or in authority, has a different position, they have a different picture than you. They're paid to look at things, or they are responsible to look at things in a different way, right? And that's why I talked about it. Sometimes it's hard to know what goes on in the king's mind, right? Because whoever that's in charge, they got a lot more information than you. Maybe not. I mean, you may be that one person who can look at the situation and go, oh, yeah, I got this. But that's what that verse is talking about, right? Hard to know what goes on in the king's mind. He's more fully in charge. And that applies to God as well. We can't see what God sees. I tell people this all the time. If your life was a book, and on page one we see, and Jeremy was born. He was X pounds, Y ounces, and he was a cute little baby. And on the last page of the book, it says, and so Jeremy died. It's several chapters away, right? And so, but God, Jeremy only has one choice. Jeremy has to go through the story of his life one page at a time, in sequence. He can't back up. But God can flip forward, he can look, he can flip back. God sees his entire life all at once. And God, I believe, God comes and will try to tell you, don't go that way. It doesn't work out for you very well, right? Because God has looked ahead. He's looked ahead and seen the outcome. And so he's planned a path for you. Right? And this goes back to trusting the judge. Right? But God, that way looks really good. Yeah, it's a trap. Go the way I'm telling you. Right? That's, you know how we catch fish, right? We talked about this last week. Bait. And what's hidden in the bait? Death. The hook. Set the hook. The fish can't get away. And so that's what God protects us from. So we need to trust, this isn't fair. I have to stay in this job. I have to drive this car. I have to be in this situation for another 6 months, another year. God's saying, patience, because what I got planned, even if you stay in it the rest of your life, God's telling you what I got planned for you, you cannot imagine. So, all right, we're going to stop there.